I almost lost my career because of my cousin. What makes it worse is that for months I defended him. Even when people quietly started questioning me at work. Even when coworkers stopped trusting me the same way. Even when my boss looked increasingly concerned every time my name became connected to another problem I couldn't explain. At the time, I kept telling myself the same thing. Derek wasn't a bad person. Irresponsible sometimes. Absolutely. Immature? Definitely. But criminal? Manipulative? Dangerous? No. At least that's what I believed before everything collapsed. My name is Mavis Carter, and 3 years ago I worked as operations coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company outside Chicago called Westgate Distribution. The job itself wasn't glamorous. Mostly schedules, shipment tracking, vendor communication, inventory reports, and solving daily disasters before upper management noticed them. But I loved it. Not because it paid exceptionally well. Because I had earned respect there. Real respect. By 32, I'd built a reputation for being reliable under pressure. People trusted me. Drivers called me directly during emergencies. Warehouse staff knew I'd actually listen when problems happened. Even senior management relied on me during complicated shipping weeks. That kind of trust matters more than salary eventually, especially when you grow up like I did. My family was chaotic in ways difficult to explain quickly. Financial instability, constant conflict, people borrowing money they never returned, promises that dissolved overnight. I spent most of my 20s trying desperately not to become another version of the adults I grew up around. So building a stable professional life meant everything to me. Which is exactly why Derek's actions nearly destroyed me emotionally. Derek was technically my cousin, though growing up he felt more like an older brother. Our mothers were extremely close, and because his father disappeared early in his childhood, Derek spent huge parts of his life around our house. As kids he was funny, protective, charismatic, the kind of person who could talk his way out of almost anything. Unfortunately, adulthood sharpened those same qualities into something much darker. By 35, Derek had already bounced through multiple failed business ideas, unpaid debts, unstable jobs, and at least 3 investment opportunities that quietly disappeared after other people lost money. Still, family always excused him. He just needs one real chance. That sentence followed Derek everywhere. And honestly, part of me believed it too. About 8 months before everything exploded, Derek called me late one evening asking for help. I just need temporary work, he said. Something stable while I get back on my feet. I should have said no immediately. Not because I hated him. Because mixing family and professional life almost always becomes messy. But Derek sounded exhausted, defeated. And despite all his flaws, I remembered the version of him who protected me from bullies when we were kids. So I helped him. Westgate needed temporary overnight inventory support during expansion season, and after multiple conversations with my direct supervisor, Elena Ramirez, I managed to get Derek hired through a probationary staffing contract. That decision changed my life. At first everything seemed fine. Derek arrived early, worked hard, made people laugh. Even warehouse supervisors complimented his energy. I remember feeling relieved more than anything else. Like maybe this really was the fresh start everyone kept hoping for. Then small problems started appearing. Missing scanner equipment, inventory discrepancies, delivery records signed incorrectly. Nothing catastrophic initially, just enough to create tension. At first nobody blamed Derek directly. Warehouse mistakes happen constantly in logistics, especially during expansion periods. But slowly patterns emerged. And unfortunately, those patterns kept circling back toward people connected to Derek. One Friday afternoon Elena called me into her office unexpectedly. She closed the door gently behind me. That alone made my stomach tighten. Elena almost never closed doors unless conversations were serious. She sat across from me quietly for several seconds before speaking. Mavis, I need to ask you something uncomfortable. Instant anxiety hit me immediately. Okay. Has Derek ever borrowed money from employees here? I frowned instantly. What? We've received complaints. My chest tightened. About what exactly? Elena opened a notebook carefully. Several workers claimed Derek asked for short-term loans during shifts. I stared at her in disbelief. How much? Different amounts. Mostly small. $50. $100. Sometimes more. Heat rushed into my face instantly. Not because of the money. Because I had personally vouched for him. Inside professional environments, reputation transfers through association faster than people realize. And suddenly I understood why certain coworkers had acted strange around me recently. Embarrassment crawled up my throat. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. Elena raised her hand gently. "I'm not accusing you of anything. But the damage already existed. I could feel it. That subtle shift in workplace trust. The horrible moment when your name becomes attached to someone else's bad behavior." "I'll talk to him," I promised quietly. Elena studied me carefully. "Mavis, are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. Because strangely enough, nobody in my family ever asked questions like that. Problems were usually minimized, ignored, or turned into jokes. But Elena genuinely sounded concerned. And somehow that almost made me emotional. "Yeah." I lied automatically. That evening I drove directly to Derek's apartment. The second he opened the door, I knew he already understood why I was there. "Oh, come on," he sighed immediately. "People are acting dramatic. You borrowed money from coworkers?" "I was short temporarily. You asked warehouse employees for cash during shifts." "So?" I stared at him. "So? Derek, I recommended you for this job. And I'm working, aren't I?" "That's not the point." He rolled his eyes dramatically and walked back into the apartment. "I already paid half of them back." "Half? Wonderful." I followed him inside. "You're making me look irresponsible." That sentence changed his expression immediately. "There it is." "What?" "You care more about your image than helping family." I actually laughed once in disbelief. Because manipulation in my family often sounded exactly like that. Guilt disguised as loyalty. "I got you employed," I snapped. "That is helping family." Derek grabbed a beer from the kitchen counter. "You think you're better than everyone now because you work in an office? That's not what this is about." "No," he said coldly. "It's about you wanting approval from strangers." The argument escalated quickly after that. Eventually I left feeling emotionally exhausted and strangely guilty despite knowing I hadn't done anything wrong. That's another thing toxic families do well. They make boundaries feel selfish. The next few weeks became increasingly uncomfortable at work. Nobody openly blamed me for Derek's behavior. But subtle changes started appearing everywhere. Conversations stopping when I entered rooms. Coworkers hesitating before involving me in certain decisions. One warehouse supervisor joking awkwardly. "Don't let your cousin borrow my paycheck too." Everyone laughed, including me. But humiliation burned through my chest the rest of the day. Then things became much worse. Around 6 weeks later, Westgate discovered multiple high-value electronic shipments had disappeared from inventory records before scheduled transport. Not random mistakes. Deliberate removals. The losses totaled nearly $80,000. Corporate management immediately launched an internal investigation. And because Derek worked overnight inventory access, his name surfaced almost instantly. Unfortunately, mine surfaced too. Not officially. Not directly. But enough. People started wondering whether I knew more than I admitted. After all, I was the employee who brought him into the company. One Monday morning I walked into the break room and conversation stopped completely. Not slowed. Stopped. That silence hurt more than accusations, honestly. Because silence means people already formed opinions privately. Later that afternoon Elena called me into her office again. This time her expression looked far more serious. "Mavis," she said carefully. "Corporate security needs access to all employee communication connected to Derek." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they'll likely review your company email and internal messages." I stared at her. "You think I'm involved?" "No," Elena said immediately. "I think someone is trying very hard to make it look like you might be." That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly I realized the situation wasn't just embarrassing anymore. Someone was actively building suspicion around me. And deep down, I already knew exactly who that someone probably was. That night I barely slept. Not because I believed I'd actually committed a crime, because I understood how easily suspicion spreads once people emotionally connect you to the wrong person. And Derek was absolutely the wrong person. The next morning, corporate security arrived at Westgate. 2 investigators from headquarters. 1 internal compliance officer. And suddenly the atmosphere inside the building changed completely. People spoke quieter. Managers closed office doors more often. Warehouse supervisors looked tense during inventory meetings. The entire company felt infected by anxiety. Around 10:30, Elena stopped by my desk. "They want to interview you first." I nodded automatically, even though my stomach instantly tightened. The conference room downstairs felt freezing cold when I walked in. 3 people sat waiting beside a stack of printed reports. One of them, a compliance director named Nathan Cole, gestured toward the chair across from him. "Mavis, thank you for cooperating." That sentence alone made me feel like a suspect already. I sat carefully. Nathan folded his hands together. "You understand why we're reviewing everyone connected to this situation?" "Yes." "Good. Then we'll keep this straightforward." For the next hour they questioned me about Derek. His hiring process. His work schedule. Whether I ever shared system access. Whether he knew security procedures. Whether I noticed suspicious behavior. The questions themselves weren't unfair. But emotionally, it felt humiliating. Like my professionalism was being weighed against my blood relation to someone reckless. Then Nathan slid several printed emails across the table. My chest tightened immediately, because they were messages from my company account. Messages I supposedly sent to Derek. I frowned instantly. "I didn't send these." Nathan watched me carefully. "You're certain?" "Yes." The emails looked strange immediately. Subtle wording differences. Odd punctuation. Tiny details most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed because they were supposedly my words. One message discussed shipment schedules. Another referenced security timing. A third mentioned inventory blind spots during overnight loading. My pulse started racing. "These are fake." The woman beside Nathan spoke calmly. "They came directly from your employee account." "No," I said immediately. "Someone used my account." Nathan leaned slightly forward. "Do you believe Derek had access?" For several seconds I couldn't answer, because admitting that felt like professionally destroying myself. Then I remembered Elena's sentence from yesterday. "Someone is trying very hard to make it look like you might be involved." And suddenly the truth became unavoidable. "Yes," I whispered. The room stayed silent. I swallowed hard. A few months ago, Derek helped me set up remote access on my home laptop after a software issue. Nathan exchanged a glance with the compliance officer. "Meaning he may have known your credentials." "I changed my password later," I said quickly. "When?" I hesitated. Too long. And immediately understood how bad that looked. "Not soon enough," I admitted quietly. Shame flooded through me instantly. Not criminal guilt. Worse. Professional embarrassment. Because deep down I knew I'd ignored warning signs out of family loyalty. After the interview ended, I expected suspension immediately. Instead, Nathan surprised me. "We're not making conclusions yet." That sentence became the only thing keeping me functional the rest of the day. Still, the social damage inside the office kept growing. Coworkers looked uncomfortable around me now. Not openly hostile. Just cautious. Like they didn't know whether trusting me was safe anymore. And honestly, that hurt more than corporate questioning. I'd spent years building credibility there. Years. Now one person was quietly poisoning it. That afternoon, Elena stopped by my office again carrying 2 coffees. She closed the door behind her and handed one to me. "You haven't eaten today, have you?" I almost laughed from exhaustion. "No." She sat across from me quietly, then finally asked, "Do you want my honest opinion?" I nodded slowly. "I think Derek is using your access intentionally." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because the fake emails are too convenient." I stared at her. "He's making you look involved enough to protect himself." The words hit hard because deep down I already feared the same thing. Elena continued carefully. "And Mavis, this part matters." I looked up. "You came forward immediately when confronted. People hiding things usually don't cooperate that openly." That tiny bit of trust almost made me emotional, because by then I felt isolated from nearly everyone. Elena leaned back in her chair. I don't think you're stupid either. I frowned slightly. What? You trusted family, she said simply. That's different. I looked down at my coffee quietly because suddenly I felt tears threatening behind my eyes. Not from weakness. From relief. Because someone still believed me. That evening I drove directly to Derek's apartment again. This time I wasn't nervous. I was furious. He opened the door smiling slightly like he already expected me. That bad at work now? My blood instantly boiled. You used my email. Derek shrugged casually. You can't prove that. The calmness in his voice terrified me. Not because he sounded dangerous. Because he sounded practiced. You're trying to frame me. Oh please, he scoffed. Nobody's framing you. You sent fake messages. You really think your company cares about you? He snapped suddenly. The second problem started. They looked at you like everyone else. That happened because of you. No, Derek said coldly. That happened because corporate people only respect you until things become inconvenient. That sentence revealed something important. Derek genuinely resented stable people, especially family members who escaped the chaos he never outgrew. You stole from the company, I said quietly. He laughed once. Allegedly. Derek. What? You think billion-dollar logistics companies are innocent victims now? There it was. The justification. Every manipulative person eventually builds moral excuses large enough to hide inside. I crossed my arms. How much did you take? His expression changed slightly. Not guilt. Calculation. Then finally. Less than they waste every week. That's not an answer. He grabbed another beer from the kitchen. You know what your problem is, Mavis? I said nothing. You still think rules protect people. I stared at him quietly. No, I said softly. I think integrity does. That actually made him laugh. A long bitter laugh that suddenly sounded almost sad. You really believe that? Yes. Derek shook his head slowly. That's why people use you. The irony of hearing that from him almost made me sick. Then suddenly he looked directly at me and said something that made my blood run cold. If things get worse, maybe you should remember who helped raise you. I froze instantly, because beneath that sentence lived a threat. Family loyalty. Silence. Protection. The same toxic pressure I grew up around my entire life. I stepped toward the door immediately. You know what's crazy? I said quietly. What? I used to feel guilty for succeeding when other people in our family struggled. Derek said nothing. But now I realize something. I opened the apartment door. You weren't struggling because nobody helped you. Then I looked directly at him. You were struggling because eventually people saw who you really are. For the first time all night, Derek looked genuinely angry. Good. I left before he could answer. The next morning, corporate security requested another meeting. This time the atmosphere felt completely different. Nathan looked calmer, more focused, and Elena was already sitting inside when I arrived. Nathan opened a folder immediately. Our forensic team reviewed login activity connected to the fraudulent emails. My heart started pounding. And the messages were sent through a remote session originating from a secondary device. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means someone accessed your account externally. Relief hit so hard it almost hurt physically. Nathan continued. The access pattern also matches overnight login sessions connected to Derek's employee credentials. For the first time in weeks I could breathe normally. Elena smiled slightly beside me. But Nathan wasn't finished. There's more. He slid several photographs across the table. Security camera images. Warehouse loading docks. Storage cages. Shipping lanes. And there, clearly visible beside unauthorized inventory pallets, was Derek. Not alone. 2 other temporary workers stood beside him moving electronics into an unregistered transport van. I stared at the images silently. The proof looked overwhelming. Real. Final. Nathan folded his hands together. Mavis, we no longer believe you were involved. I didn't realize how tense my body had become until that exact moment. Because despite trying to stay logical, some terrified part of me truly believed my career might already be ruined permanently. Then Nathan added something unexpected. Actually, Elena believes you may have helped expose this faster than we otherwise would have caught it. I looked toward her immediately. She shrugged slightly. You told the truth early. That sentence mattered more to me than either of them probably understood. Because after weeks of suspicion and humiliation, someone finally saw me separately from Derek. Not as his cousin, as myself. For the first time in nearly 2 months, I walked out of that conference room without feeling like people were secretly watching me. But relief didn't erase the damage immediately. Trust returns slower than suspicion leaves. That's something nobody tells you. Even after corporate security confirmed I wasn't involved, the emotional fallout inside the company remained complicated. Some coworkers suddenly became overly nice to me out of guilt. Others avoided discussing the situation entirely. And a few still looked uncertain whenever Derek's name came up. I understood why. When someone close to you becomes associated with fraud, people unconsciously start wondering whether you ignored signs intentionally. Honestly, part of me wondered the same thing. That afternoon Elena stopped by my office again. She leaned lightly against the doorway. You should go home early. I shook my head immediately. No, I want to work. She studied me carefully for a moment. You know you don't have to prove your loyalty every second now, right? That sentence hit harder than expected. She was right. Ever since the investigation started, I'd been operating like someone trying to earn back humanity itself. Longer hours, extra reports, constant availability, as if exhaustion could somehow repair damaged perception. I just need things to feel normal again, I admitted quietly. Elena nodded sympathetically. They will. Then after a brief pause, but not immediately. I appreciated her honesty more than false reassurance. Over the next week, corporate investigators uncovered far more theft than anyone originally expected. Derek and the 2 temporary workers had been systematically manipulating inventory records for months. Small removals at first, single electronics pallets, then larger shipments. By spreading discrepancies across multiple overnight cycles, they avoided triggering automatic audit flags. The operation was smarter than I expected from Derek, honestly, which somehow made everything worse. Because intelligence used selfishly becomes dangerous quickly. Nathan later explained that the fake emails connected to my account were likely created as insurance. If investigators traced suspicious inventory activity toward Derek, he told me, he wanted proximity to you muddying the situation, meaning I was never simply collateral damage. I was part of his protection strategy. That realization sat heavily in my chest for days. The person I defended was fully willing to sacrifice my career if it helped him escape consequences. And somehow that betrayal hurt even more than the fraud itself. 3 days later, Derek was officially arrested. I found out accidentally. One warehouse supervisor mentioned seeing police vehicles outside Derek's apartment complex before sunrise. Then by lunchtime everyone inside Westgate knew. News spreads fast inside logistics companies, especially scandals. Around 2 in the afternoon my phone buzzed. My mother. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. The second I heard her voice, I knew exactly how the conversation would go. Mavis, she said anxiously, please tell me you're not talking to investigators about Derek. No. Are you okay? No. What happened? No concern whatsoever about the damage done to me. Just Derek. I closed my office door quietly. Mom, he stole from the company. You don't know the full story. Yes, I said calmly. Actually, I do. He's family. There it was. The sentence that poisoned generations in my family. He's family. As if DNA automatically erased accountability. I sat slowly at my desk. You know what nobody asked me through all this? Silence. How I'm doing. My mother sighed heavily like I was becoming difficult. You have a good job. Derek doesn't. I almost laughed in disbelief. So that excuse is framing me? He would never intentionally hurt you. Problem was, I no longer believed that. And deep down I think my mother knew it too. That conversation changed something permanent inside me. For the first time in my life I stopped confusing family loyalty with moral obligation. They are not the same thing. At all. The following Monday, Elena invited me to sit in on a senior operations meeting again for the first time since the investigation started. That might sound small, but professionally it meant everything. Because exclusion inside workplaces often happens quietly long before termination does. Being brought back into leadership discussions told me something important. They trusted me again. Or at least they were choosing to. The meeting itself lasted nearly 2 hours. Shipment recovery plans, security restructuring, audit protocol updates, normal operational chaos. And strangely enough, normalcy felt emotional after weeks of isolation. Toward the end of the meeting, one regional director named Patrick turned toward me. "Mavis," he said carefully, "I know the last month has been difficult." Every person at the table looked toward me immediately. "We appreciate how cooperative and transparent you've been through this process." I nodded quietly, unsure what to say. Then Patrick added something unexpected. "Frankly, your early honesty probably saved the company significant losses." That sentence stunned me. Because for weeks I'd only focused on the humiliation and suspicion. I never considered that speaking up early may have actually helped stop things faster. After the meeting ended, several managers stayed behind talking casually with me again for the first time in weeks. And while the interaction itself wasn't dramatic, I noticed something important. Nobody looked uncomfortable anymore. That nearly made me cry in the elevator afterward. Not because I needed everyone to love me, because professional trust is fragile. And once you feel it slipping away, you realize how much of your identity quietly depends on it. A few days later, Elena asked me to join her for coffee after work. We sat at a small cafe across from the warehouse district while freezing rain hit the windows outside. For a while we talked about completely ordinary things: staffing shortages, holiday schedules, inventory software. Then eventually Elena looked at me thoughtfully. "Can I ask something personal?" "Sure. Why did you keep defending Derek for so long?" The question wasn't judgmental, just honest. I stared into my coffee quietly before answering. "Because in my family, helping people became tied to tolerating behavior you shouldn't tolerate." Elena nodded slowly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Then after a pause, I admitted the part that bothered me most. I think I kept hoping he'd become the version of himself everyone always described. "What version?" "The one who just needed a chance." Elena smiled sadly. "Some people don't want chances, Mavis." I looked up. "They want access." That sentence settled heavily in my chest because suddenly it explained Derek perfectly. Jobs, money, relationships, trust. To him, people weren't connections. They were opportunities. And the moment accountability appeared, loyalty disappeared. About 2 weeks later, corporate security finished their final report. Derek and the other workers were charged with organized inventory theft, fraud, and digital credential misuse. The fake emails tied to my account were officially classified as fabricated evidence intended to redirect suspicion internally. Seeing those words written formally felt surreal. Fabricated evidence intended to redirect suspicion. A clinical way of describing betrayal. Nathan later told me something else privately. "If Elena hadn't pushed back early, things could have gone very differently for you." I frowned immediately. "What do you mean?" He hesitated slightly. "Some executives initially wanted immediate suspension." Cold rushed through my chest. "Why?" "Because companies panic during theft investigations." That answer honestly frightened me. Because he was right. Organizations often protect themselves first and ask careful questions later. Meaning one person's willingness to see nuance may have saved my entire career. That realization changed how I viewed Elena permanently. Not just as a boss. As someone who chose fairness when it would have been easier to choose distance. And honestly, that kind of leadership is rare. About a month after Derek's arrest, life at Westgate finally started feeling stable again. Not completely normal. I don't think situations like that ever fully become normal afterward. But the constant tension disappeared. People stopped whispering when I entered rooms. Coworkers started including me naturally in conversations again. And slowly, piece by piece, I felt my professional identity returning. What surprised me most was how emotionally exhausted I remained even after my name was cleared. I used to think surviving a crisis meant reaching the moment where everyone finally realized you were innocent. But that's not actually the hardest part. The hardest part is rebuilding your sense of safety afterward. Because once someone close to you weaponizes trust, you start questioning your own judgment constantly. At home, at work, everywhere. One Thursday evening I stayed late helping finalize quarterly shipment reports when Elena stopped beside my desk. "You're doing it again," she said. I looked up from the monitor. "What?" "Overworking because you feel guilty." I sighed softly. "I'm just catching up." "No," she said calmly. "You're trying to earn forgiveness nobody's asking for." That sentence hit painfully close to the truth. Because even after being cleared, part of me still carried embarrassment like something sticky beneath my skin. Elena pulled a chair beside my desk. "Mavis, can I tell you something honestly?" "Sure." "When this investigation started, corporate executives were nervous about you immediately." I nodded quietly. "I figured. But I watched how you responded under pressure." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You never became defensive. Never blamed other people. Never lied to protect yourself." I stared at her for several seconds, because strangely enough, nobody had ever complimented me for integrity before. Hard work. Yes. Responsibility. Constantly. But integrity? That felt different. Elena folded her arms lightly. "Do you know why that mattered?" I shook my head. Because trustworthy people usually care more about truth than appearances. That sentence stayed with me long after she walked away. A week later, corporate leadership held a company-wide operations meeting addressing the theft investigation formally for the first time. I almost dreaded attending. Not because I feared blame anymore. Because public attention after private humiliation feels unbearable. The entire warehouse staff gathered inside the main distribution floor near the loading bays while senior management explained updated security procedures and audit policies. Then unexpectedly, Regional Director Patrick stepped toward the microphone again. "There's one more thing I want to address clearly," he said. The room became quiet. Patrick looked directly toward me across the crowd. "During this investigation, one employee demonstrated exceptional professionalism, cooperation, and integrity under extremely difficult circumstances." My stomach tightened instantly. "Oh no. Please don't do this publicly." Mavis Carter helped investigators identify internal inconsistencies early, remained transparent throughout the process, and continued supporting operations despite significant personal pressure. Every person in the room looked at me now. I wanted to disappear physically. But then something unexpected happened. People started clapping. Not politely. Genuinely. Warehouse supervisors. Office staff. Drivers. Even coworkers who previously avoided eye contact. For several seconds I just stood there stunned while emotion climbed painfully into my throat. Because after weeks of feeling quietly contaminated by someone else's actions, people finally saw me separately again. Not Derek's cousin. Not a possible liability. Me. Later that afternoon, one forklift operator named Calvin stopped beside my desk awkwardly. "Hey," he muttered. "I owe you an apology." I looked up surprised. "For what?" "I kinda thought maybe you knew more than you admitted at first." He looked embarrassed admitting it. But honestly, I appreciated the honesty. "It's okay," I said quietly. "No," Calvin replied immediately. "It's not. You didn't deserve that." That conversation mattered more than he probably realized. Because rebuilding trust doesn't happen through official reports. It happens through small human moments. Weeks later, I finally learned the full scale of what Derek's theft group had been doing. Over $300,000 in stolen inventory across multiple facilities. Fake transport documentation. Credential misuse. Fraudulent vendor pickups. The operation stretched farther than anyone originally believed. And somehow knowing that gave me strange closure. Because it confirmed something important. I hadn't failed to notice one bad decision. Derek had become someone deeply practiced at deception. That distinction helped me stop blaming myself so aggressively. Around that same time, my mother called again. This conversation felt very different from the first one. Quieter. More tired. "He accepted a plea deal," she said softly. I closed my eyes briefly. "When?" "Yesterday." Part of me expected to feel victorious hearing that. Instead, I mostly felt sad. Not because Derek avoided consequences, because somewhere underneath everything, I still remembered the boy who protected me when we were children. My mother spoke again carefully. He says you abandoned him. That sentence would have destroyed me emotionally a year earlier. Now, I just felt tired. No, I answered quietly. I stopped protecting lies. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then my mother whispered something I never expected to hear from her. You did the right thing. I nearly stopped breathing. Because accountability almost never existed openly in my family. Excuses did. Minimizing did. Deflection definitely did. But not accountability. After hanging up, I sat quietly at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about how families pass unhealthy loyalty patterns through generations without realizing it. Protecting people from consequences isn't love. Sometimes it's the exact thing destroying them. 3 months later, Elena recommended me for promotion into regional operations management. When she first told me, I honestly laughed in disbelief. You cannot be serious. I am serious. After everything that happened? Elena leaned back in her office chair. Mavis, after everything that happened, you're more qualified than most people. I frowned. That makes no sense. It actually does, she said calmly. Character becomes visible under pressure. Nobody had ever framed hardship that way before. Not as damage, as revelation. The promotion process took another month, but eventually I got the position. Better salary, larger team, more responsibility. And ironically, the worst professional crisis of my life became the moment that ultimately advanced my career. Not because suffering magically creates success, because someone in leadership chose fairness instead of convenience. That matters more than people realize. Last winter, Elena and I had dinner after a regional conference downtown. At one point, she looked at me over her wine glass and smiled slightly. You know what impressed me most through all this? What? You never became bitter. I laughed softly. Oh, I definitely came close. No, she said. You became more careful. That's different. I thought about that sentence all the way home. Because she was right. The experience changed me permanently. I lock things more carefully now. I separate personal and professional boundaries more aggressively. I pay attention when people use guilt to avoid accountability. And I no longer believe being family automatically earns unlimited trust. But bitterness? No. I didn't want Derek's choices turning me into someone suspicious of everyone forever. That would have been another thing he stole. A few months ago, I received a handwritten letter from Derek in prison. I almost threw it away unopened. But eventually curiosity won. Most of the letter contained excuses, complaints, rationalizations, the usual emotional gymnastics people perform when they still can't fully face themselves. But one sentence stayed with me afterward. You always cared too much about what people thought of you. First the line made me angry, then eventually I realized something important. Derek was wrong. What I cared about wasn't approval. It was trust. There's a difference. Approval is temporary. Trust is built slowly through consistency, honesty, and responsibility. And once broken, it takes enormous effort to rebuild. That's what Derek never understood. At Westgate, people eventually respected me again, not because I defended myself loudly, but because over time my actions remained consistent with who I claimed to be. And honestly, that lesson changed my life far more than the investigation itself ever did.